this part of this presentation is now being handed over to you. We're looking for your comments, any questions, any suggestions, and I don't know who wishes to be the first person. Let me just say, while Mr. Butterfield is coming up here to ask his question, should you have a question, please make your way up here. There are 3 seats here for anyone who wishes to ask questions, because this will not get to the back of the room. It is attached to a cord.
Good evening, everybody. I can make comments too, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The reason why I jumped up first, because last week I sat here and listened to the report up at St. Paul's, and then when I had opportunity to talk, it was too late, so I couldn't get to say anything. But I hesitated because what I wanted to say, I did not want to create a turn for the meeting. You know, I just wanted everybody to be able to do their thing first. But I heard mentioned last week RAGE committee, which I guess is revenue generating. You know, and I don't see how we, all of us here, and there are a lot of us Bermudians that are not here, right, that make a lot of money. I just want to make it clear on that. So I think you might understand where I'm going. But I want to make it perfectly clear before I say anything anymore, is that I am not speaking, I know that this is a PLP meeting, but I'm not speaking PLP, right? And, you know, just in case anybody of the press is here or anything like that, you know, I don't want them to say that PLP said, right? But, you know, I cannot see how this country, this government, when I say the government, I'm not talking about PLP or OBA, but I'm talking about us as Bermuda government, our representatives. I cannot see how they can get out of this financial situation in which we find ourselves without raising tax revenue. In other words, without finding a new way of taxation in this country. I don't see it. You know, and I hear this term or these words speaking around this country right now is that we need to make the difficult decisions. I hear that. And I also hear, right, that we need to have shared sacrifice. No, I've looked at this SAGE Commission report, and what I see, I do not see shared sacrifice. I'm sorry, I just don't see it. Right? There are businesses in this community, and of which I am one of them. And there are individuals in this community still, regardless of what this recession says, that make a whole lot of money. And they need to share into what we find ourselves, under which we find ourselves. I mean, if we just pick on a certain section of the community, and it might help us a little bit, but it's not going to help us a lot. Right? You know, I know that at least it's not going to help us quickly. And I also hear that we need to implement things and get this done quickly within the next 5 years or whatever it is. It's not going to happen, right? You know, I don't care what anybody says. I can see it's not going to happen. So therefore, we need to stand up in this country, as people of this country right now, and to make sure that everybody, that means you and I, and I'm sorry, it also means pensioners, Diddy. Right, and it also, you know, it means just everybody needs to stick the hands in their pockets and pull out some money and help this country to get out the position that it's in. Right, and the only way I can do that is for us to tax everybody fairly. That's the only way, and that's the only way I see it. Maybe our former Premier Cox, you know, you were finance minister. Maybe you might see things differently. You know, maybe there's some information that I don't know. But I can see it being done. And let me just say, what I'm about to say is the elephant in the room. We need income tax. You know, I'm just saying that. I'm not going to say anymore because I don't want to take up much more time, but I'm going to stress it again. I honestly believe we need income tax. And I just want to be clear because I know how elections go and everything. The PLP didn't say that. Quentin Butterfield said it. We need income tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butterfield. And remember, we are here to garner ideas and your concerns. We want to be able to represent the people. So does someone else have a comment or question? Please make your way up front.
So good evening, everybody. My question really is for the party in terms of the context for the debate that's going to come up next week, Friday. And the reason I'm asking is because I think that we are actually all making a mistake in terms of the CH Commission report has now been done. And I think it's a good report in terms of all the information that it has, right? But if we start the conversation at the CH Commission report, we've started at the wrong point, I believe. I think the correct point is going to be to figure out, number one, we keep on hearing these comments about the debt and how all these negative connotations, right? As opposed to putting that in context so we understand what I believe should happen is, number one, what is the Bermuda government, the government, target GDP? That's the first thing we have to figure out, because right now it's going down. We keep on criticizing, but we don't know what we want it to be. And once we get that done, then we can go to the other side in terms of, in the context of the conversation, what is the target debt level that we're going to be comfortable with? Because I keep saying that way back when, it was meant to be 10% of GDP. And for good reason now that's increased. We need to figure out what's the new target, and then we can start working towards those two things at least. And then the third point, which I think, I don't agree with you necessarily, but I think in terms of the government services and staffing level, we need to figure out what do we think is the right services, and then what's the right staffing level, and then figure out how we're going to get from where we are to what we believe is the correct target. And then what I don't want to do, but I'm going to do right now because I happen to have the mic, is what you said, is that at this point in time, right, what's been recommended by the CH Commission, it will not work. It is mathematically impossible for what's been recommended to take place unless we do have what I coined as the Rage Commission. The Rage Commission is what you're talking about, though. It's intended to look at two things. One is, what is the Bermuda revenue? That's the R part of it, right? Which would look at the GDP to figure out what are we going to be doing to look for different sources of revenue. The E part of it is actually government earnings, and that looks at not necessarily payroll, income tax, but looks more in terms of what should we do in terms of how government raises its taxes from GDP effectively. And what I think people don't quite necessarily get is, at the moment, the Bermuda government tax structure, it's based upon labor. What it means is that if you have a construction company, right, you may have, say, 10 employees. Those 10 employees, you have to pay them, of course, and then you pay payroll tax based on that. I'm an accountant. I can make the exact same amount of money with 2 people. So what it means is that my payroll tax is a lot less than yours. And that's what I think is unfair. And we have to look at that. Even in the context of, if we expect Bermuda to have, which they always say now, less employees, it means that you have to change your tax structure from a employee-based to a knowledge-based, which has a whole different connotation for everybody. But my main point, I guess, for tonight is to understand better what is going to be the context for the debate next week, Friday. And I guess the last comment I'll make is that I have a major concern if we take what MP Ruben said, that this document will fundamentally change Bermuda. And I don't think there's been enough time to properly explain what's in the document to the general public. And even tonight, for example, some of the, I guess, the explanation has not been in what I consider to be layman's terms. So we will not all understand it. And clearly, I don't want to keep on talking because it's, in 3 minutes, but it's so much stuff has to be explained that has not been done, which I think is a disservice to the country. And somehow it has to be addressed. Like, the last thing I'm going to say is this. When it comes to the government pensions, there has to be, as I think MP Ruben, Commission would normally do, is put it in the correct historical context. The government pensions were based on past labor practices and policies. And prior to probably around about 1970, give or take, it was difficult, if not impossible, for black people to work in the public service, except for very few exceptions. And if you then look at the history of the pension plans, prior to then, there were very good pension plans coming up to 1970, and they favored those who worked in the public service, which are mostly non-blacks. From 1981, they changed the act to allow industrial employees to then have pensions. And so this whole thing and conversation again about the public pensions being in, $1 billion in debt, whatever the case may be, that is based on a structural error in terms of how the pensions themselves were first put in place. And what happened in the past, I guess about 5 or 10 years now, is that the former government changed it to at least allow for contributions to be different based upon your potential benefit. Yeah? And so I think even that has to be explained so we have a better context to understand all this stuff. And I am concerned, of course, as Bermudian, because I have children when I have KCB. So we need to find a better way, I believe, to properly explain this information in layman's terms. Then you can go and debate as you're going to do in any event, and then figure out what is really going to be a joined-up way to make this thing happen, or to somehow fix what we think needs to be fixed. And as I said, too, is that I hope that we end up with a situation by which Leader Mark Bean and Premier Kennedy somehow join together and deal with this, because it cannot be done either one side or the other, because otherwise we're going to fail. It's mathematically impossible to succeed as it's currently done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Are we going to hear from anyone else? Let me say this, that we've heard so far basically what can be some very grave concerns in terms of the impact on the workforce. And we've also heard just briefly in terms of what may be the best way forward in terms of approaching this to turn it around. And so maybe we'd like to hear from you in terms of what your concerns may be in terms of the impact to the workforce, or what your specific knowledge is within the domain that you do work, in terms of how you see it, perhaps, this SAGE report impacting that area, or maybe what you see as a better way forward in terms of your profession, and how you see that actually being applied to the model that's being suggested here in the SAGE report, and how it can improve things for the future. So I'd like, does anyone want to get up and speak from personal experience or speak to their concerns? Thank you, Mr. Richards. I taught him.
Good evening, all. I don't think necessarily I want to speak to personal experience or anything, but I know in reading what I have of the SAGE report, it's pretty thorough in terms of what it wants to do to government workers. And I think the panelists gave a good, I guess you could say, description of who government workers are. But I think more importantly, if we understand what business is and what the bottom line for business is that it's about the dollar. And if we really want to get to the root of it and fix things or try to address them, I think it's the healthcare system that needs to be looked at. Insurance is a very, very, how could I put it to you? Ludicrous business. And when I say that, I mean when we are hired and when we are fired and when people are looking at their businesses, they're looking at what each employee costs. And that means insurance, because the majority of that cost is insurance. And as a result of that, I think it's important that that's what we're looking at. We need to press for a similar report as SAGE has given us in regards to government employees as what insurance means to us in Bermuda. Because, I mean, it is ridiculous the amount of money that employers pay for our insurances. And I think that is the part that is in the balance and people don't truly understand. They're looking at employers and saying, how could you fire me? How could you let me go? And how could you make me redundant? But it's the bottom line, that dollar. And I think the insurance part is what we're missing. So I think this was a pretty comprehensive report. It wasn't as thorough as I may have liked it to be. And mind you, I haven't really read it thoroughly and had the time to digest it either. But what I would say is I think that we need similar reports done in other areas before we can truly move forward and include everybody. That's my say.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Richardson. And we do appreciate your comments. Given the time frame that's before us before the debate comes up, we try to pick out areas that we thought were important to bring to you and to highlight to you, because we realize that we might not be able to hit every point in that report, but nonetheless, we're here, we're discussing it, and at least that's a step forward. I would like to say, in terms of Mr. Richardson's comment on the campaign trail, that was a major concern, construction workers speaking to me in terms of the numbers. I had several construction workers in St. David say that they felt that the system that is in play is unfair because it is a labor-intensive industry, whereas, as you say, you're, as a white-collar worker, you can have 2, 3 people making even more than that entire construction firm. And so what that business owner in the construction firm pays out is woefully disproportionate in terms of the accounting firm, so to speak. So that was a concern that was brought to my attention many times. Are we going to hear from anybody else? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to speak on the taxes that Mr. Bonneville talked about. I think luxury tax would be important because in the private sector, with the bonuses that, the chairman of the Sage Commissioner received when he retired, $30 million is a lot of money. And 35 million. Many of these guys buy boats. They buy a lot of boats. I've worked for them. Some of them have 3 and 4 boats a year. That is money. That's luxury tax. We should be taxing on that. In another area, privatization, in my opinion, it hasn't just come from this Sage Commission. They already knew about this. Look, if any of you were at the immigration meeting last night, Walter Brown spoke. He actually touched on us going back in time and what's going to happen with this Immigration Act. And this 60-40 rule and privatization and outsourcing is all linked. Don't you believe the hype that is not. This is another way of opening up the floodgates and letting everybody else in and displacing Bermudians. Our children coming back from school, they're not going to have jobs. So all this money we're spending on education is going to go down the drain. So we need to come together with some great ideas to decide how we want to move forward, because this privatization is not going to work for me. I don't know about anybody else, but it can't work for us. It just cannot. Thank you.
Do we have any other comments or questions? Yes, Ms. Anderson.
I would like to know,
Just a minute, Ms. Anderson. It can reach you.
thank you. When the PLP gets there and debates this issue with the OBA, what exactly, or is it just things you want to hear from us that you're going to debate, or things that you've all come up with that you're going to debate? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, every aspect of this wretched report needs to be debated. People are not realizing the number of people coming into our place of employment looking for jobs every day now. It's young black men, okay? It's young black men. That's where our problems are coming from now. They have no jobs. They've got nothing else to do except what? Join a gang and shoot you? We've got to get some jobs for these people. If they're not getting jobs now, how are they going to get them later? How are they going to get them later? And this is one of the focuses we have to focus on. Pensions, I said a long time ago, I don't know why they increased pensions for older people. They're not putting no more into it. But now look at the pension thing, because they did increase it. And now we're all out of whack. So every aspect of this report, and there's no way it can be debated this Friday, next Friday, or any other Friday, this needs to be really looked into for a few months and then debated. And why isn't the OBA coming down here and saying something about what they trying to promote this report? Thank you.
Well, it is an open meeting, so anyone is invited. But let me say this: we do work as a team, and we will try to deal with the matter from a comprehensive point of view. There are quite a few of us who will get up and debate, and we will handle whatever sections we feel we are well versed in. And the reason why we're here, you asked the question, is because we do want to hear from the public. We want to be able to, while debating, echo the sentiments that are coming from the public at large, because this, of course, will impact you. So we can't do that if we don't bring the issues to you to at least try and glean from you your concerns. So again, that's why we're here tonight, to try and get as much input as we can. And in the parliamentary process, once the rules have been considered, the government does indicate when they are going to debate a matter, and whether we want to debate it that day or not, we are obliged, and so we have to do our homework to make certain that we make cogent comments and cogent arguments so that things can be considered as they should be. So hopefully we will be able to infuse all of the input from the public, as well as make some arguments that will be cause for, I guess, proper reflection on what the SAID report has suggested in terms of recommendations. And it is a take-note motion, and so hopefully the arguments that we as a team present will indeed perhaps make them turn course. How about you do that? You are. Here, you go. Let's share. Team up.
Well, Madam Whip could easily have explained this because she's involved very intimately with the House business in managing these things with the government whip. But a take-note motion is essentially a motion where there's no vote involved. We debate the issue, and we debate it substantively, but the government has decided to word the motion in a way that there will be no requirement for a vote. So we just discussed the document and its detail, but it doesn't, how the motion is worded doesn't require any action of the government on the motion. So it's just take note. Just like you would take note of something that you see, that's all we're doing in the House. We're not going to be debating it as an issue that the government is required to act on. But as you know, this document was not created to not be acted on. But that's how they decided to deal with it in the legislature. I hope I've explained it properly, Madam Whip.
Do we have any more questions or concerns that you wish to share? Yes?
So, following on from the take note motion, implementation will come. This question came from this order. Implementation will come as a matter of the policy being made by the government, and then policy will be turned into some level of a cabinet paper and decision. So the decision might require legislation. Then there will be a vote on that, but that would be the activation stage. Policy, sometimes policy can be rolled out without legislation, so bear that in mind. That's part of the process. So keep an eye on your government's motions and activity in terms of policy or bringing bills in relation to these recommendations. I wanted to ask whether it was an omission as to how, for example, on privatization, Walter, what consideration would be, what would be the consideration for transference of any public sector systems, transport control, to a private holder? How would they assess the value of it, and would money be exchanged?
Well, I think that's part of the holes that are not quite outlined in the report. They don't actually explain that process. What I believe is that since they have the privatization and outsourcing authority, that will be the body that will assess and create these procedures for how a sector of government is going to be assessed, what indicators they're going to use to determine if it's a candidate for privatization or outsourcing, and also the process that will be put in place to do that. Some sort of competitive bidding process, perhaps, or some other method that they'll use. But that's the body that essentially, I do believe, based on the report, would commence what Mr. Scott has asked about. So this report hasn't given us that detail, but it appears as if the Privatization Outsourcing Authority is who is going to go through the process of creating these procedures and processes to decide which departments of government will be considered, which departments, and assess them in a way that says you're a candidate for privatization, you're a candidate for outsourcing, and why, and putting in place a process that would carry that out successfully.
But am I mistaken that there's about another 10,000 pages or something like that information? And what does that information consist of?
Thank you, Mr. Butterfield, for asking that very interesting question. As we've all heard, that this is the 140-odd page document, and assisting, and it's even referenced in a number of places, that there are annexes of other documents that the commission would have created that allowed them to create this. There's a reference to a USB that will have this. We as legislators have not received that. So we have no knowledge or have had any sight of those documents, though we are told that we're supposed to have it because it's mentioned here as a support for the document, but we as legislators in the Senate and in the House have not received it. I believe Madam Whip is doing her best to try and obtain it, but we are facing the debate on the 13th, and we have not seen those documents to even ourselves have an understanding as to how the States Commission came to some of these conclusions and, on this. So we're at a loss. I'm not trying to taint this discussion, but I'm just telling you is that we have not seen those documents at all. And with some hope and work by our whip and others, perhaps we will get to see them and be able to even at a future time give you more clarity to how those persons who were tasked with putting this together came to these conclusions and recommendations.
Thank you. Let me just remind you that the debate will be taking place on December the 13th, and you are welcome to come and sit in the gallery and listen to the debate as it's happening. Remember, it's the People's Parliament. It doesn't belong to parliamentarians. So, do we have any other questions or concern? Yes. Could you just...
I want to know how much when people here are working, what type of money stays in Bermuda and what type of money leaves Bermuda, and what they pay on revenue when they send the money out of Bermuda.
I think I'm not sure exactly what you were asking with that question, but were you asking, is there any sort of tax that they have to pay or money that they take out of Bermuda? Yes.
At this time, what you do, you have what's called the FCPT, which is a foreign currency purchase tax, and that's 1% at this time. So if you are sending money out of Bermuda, you're paying 1% on the value of that money. Yes. So, is that, are you in there's any other tax on top of that?
Do they have to pay any tax on top of the money that they're sending? No, not. Okay, thank you for that, and that's certainly something that we can query as we continue to do our work for you. Okay.
My main concern is the fact that nothing was mentioned tonight about the whole issue of immigration. Now, I'm from somewhere else, but I feel like I'm a Bermudian. I've been here 25 years. And I was concerned over the fact that Mr. Soares made a statement. I think he spoke before the Rotary about Bermudians not really being smart enough, and you need to bring some more people in. And I had to question whether or not is he in collaboration with the SAGE report, simply because a lot of their narrative is the same thing. And then I'm looking at the Minister of Home Affairs, Minister Fay, who insists that more people need to come to Bermuda. And like everyone else who was devastated by the situation in the Philippines, I have this deep gut feeling that they're going to start bringing in people from the Philippines. And not so much because they're not in need, but simply because I've worked in healthcare for many years, and what the Philippines does is import healthcare workers. Just like in India, in that part of the world, they train and import IT people. And if you notice, all over the world, in healthcare and in IT business, international business, the majority of those folk are either from Asia, the Philippines, or India. And I'm concerned that the SAGE Commission has this view of importing these people into Bermuda to take Bermudian jobs. In fact, my thing is, these people would sell Bermuda to the highest bidder. The OBA would sell Bermuda to the highest bidder. And this is not a political statement. This is just the fact of how I feel. And I think it's something that Bermudians need to be concerned about. The fact that they're telling Bermudians you're not smart enough. People go away and get education, get degrees. They still can't get a job. But you see buzz all around the place, people driving trucks. And I'm saying, can't a Bermudian drive a truck? I mean, you see all these different people of all races and other minorities taking jobs. And so I think it's something that people really, really do need to be concerned about. At least I'm concerned about it. Thank you very much.